Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. So today commences the first webinar Wednesday for IGDA in 2016, and we're very happy to have you guys on board. Just a quick note, our goal is to be providing monthly webinars to you on a variety of topics in the industry that's going to help you improve your skills and grow your careers. So we're starting off with a good one. Please keep in mind during the presentation that while you can hear us speaking, we're not able to hear you talking. However, if you do have questions or comments during the presentation, you can type them in the control panel. And if we have time or if we have a bit of a break in the session, I'll make sure to read your questions, and if not, perhaps David will have time to after the session today. All right, well, let's jump right in. So today's topic, improving productivity at Ubisoft, better tools and pipelines with user experience, is going to be a great one, and I'm very happy to introduce David Lightbown, who's here with us today.
Hi.
Hello, David. So I understand that you've been in the industry for 15 years, which is incredible, but let's jump right in and talk about you. Tell us about your career. Tell us what has led you to the position of User Experience Director for the Technology Group at Ubisoft Montreal.
Sure. So I'll just, if I can just grab the screen.
Yes, sir. I'm going to give you the presenter. There you go.
Okay. All right. Do you see me?
Yes, we can see you.
You see a happy guy with the words
I see you
UX?
very happy.
Excellent. All right, perfect. So yeah, just a really quick overview about how I got here. So I guess best to start maybe with a timeline. So right now we're in 2016, and before 2000, I was working predominantly in web, and I did some TV effects stuff. And I kind of cut my teeth a little bit on doing some 3D and user interface things, and I guess I didn't realize it at the time, but that would lead to some other skills that I would use later on in my career. And yeah, in 2001, I got my first job in the games industry. It was really awesome. We're really, really happy about that. And since then, I've sort of been focusing on basically tech art, and spent a good part of my career as a technical director. So I did a lot of work, creating tools for artists, understanding pipelines and that kind of thing, trying to accelerate people's productivity. So that was always a passion of mine. Yeah, so what about, I'd say, 2010, say around here, Autodesk every year gives out an award for people who use Maya, people who use Max and Motion Builder. And in 2010, I won the Maya Master, the Autodesk Master Award, which is a really big achievement for me as well. But at the same time, it was a bit of a turning point for me. At that point, I was trying to think of ways to accelerate the productivity of artists in the games industry, and I felt like I was hitting a bit of a wall. And I was trying to figure out sort of a methodology or a technique that I can use to try to improve their productivity more. And so I started looking around at other, reading books and looking around at other industries. And one of my colleagues handed me a book called The Inmates Are Running the Asylum that kind of opened my eyes to this whole other thing that I hadn't heard of before called user experience and user experience design, which was based in psychology, cognition, perception, and it was really a technique. And there were certain things that I had done as a TD that I hadn't really realized that I was sort of doing that were part of this field in a certain way. So I started doing research and reading books, and I put together a couple of slides to try to convince people in the industry that this is an important thing to apply to our game development tools. And in 2013, I started working at Ubisoft in the role of UX director, and I've been doing that ever since. And so in 2013, I also gave a talk at GDC Europe, which you can find on the Vault, and there's also links to it. And also in 2015, I gave another talk at GDC about UX and game development tools, and my book as well, which is called the Designing the User Experience of Game Development Tools, came out in 2015 as well. Basically about all of this stuff, because I want to try to get the word out and get as many people to understand how understanding user experience can help make game development tools more productive.
Very cool. And for me, someone who's not necessarily in technology, user experience is gaining more and more popularity, especially in the games industry, and you're hearing it everywhere. You, for
Yeah.
example, your book, your GDC talks, this
Mhm.
webinar, things like that is just a small example of it. So
Mhm.
in your words, what is user experience?
Yeah, that's a really good question because there's a lot of misunderstanding and different opinions about what it is exactly and what it's not. So one of the biggest misunderstandings, I think, about user experience is that it's something that we create. And it's not really that at all. A user experience is exactly what it sounds like. It's the experience of the user. It's what the user experiences when they use the tools, when they're working in these pipelines. So when a lot of people think about the word, when they hear the word UX, they think about user interfaces and tools. And that is certainly one thing that contributes to the experience of the user. And there's other things as well that some people think about. They might think about the aesthetics of the interface, the colors that we use in that interface. But everything that the user experiences contributes to that, basically. So for example, if the network speed in their environment is slow and they are not able to work as efficiently, that contributes to their experience. Or if they're loading and saving files and their hard drive is not as fast as it could be, or anything else related to hardware, that affects their user experience as well. If the folders, the data hierarchy for the assets are difficult to understand, that affects their user experience, or if they have difficulty finding things. And likewise, as I was talking about environment, their physical environment in the office, their desk, where everything is placed, where they're sitting, the distance and all that stuff, all of this can affect their user experience. So again, all of these things contribute to the experience of the user. Now, the important thing to note is that user experience is not something that we create, like I said. However, we can observe the user experience, and there are things that we can do to influence the user experience. And when it comes to other products on the market, consumer electronics products, when we talk about user experience of something, let's say, like an iPod, we're talking about trying to improve something like the fun or the aesthetics, the desirability of it. But when it comes to game development, obviously we're talking about improving productivity. So we want to try to make people more productive. Now, the techniques that we use to observe and to try to influence the user experience are similar, but our goals are different. So when you hear a lot about user experience, often you hear about it in relation to entertainment products, but we can use those techniques as well to try to improve the productivity of game developers.
So UX is about the experience of the user.
Mm-hmm.
So how does the field, in your experience, of UX help us understand people?
Yeah, so that's a good point because so I talked about observing people. So when we observe people, right, what are we observing exactly? We're observing their experience, and what is it that goes on in their head when they're working, right? And I spoke about this at GDC 2013. And there's something that it's important to understand when you observe people in their environment and how they work, and it's called the action cycle. And this action cycle, sometimes, there are some examples of it that are very complex, some that are very simple. It's been initially proposed, it was initially proposed, maybe about 50 years ago. Don Norman as well recently talked about something called the human action cycle, but I'm going to give you a very simple overview about what it is, basically. So when a user, or when people essentially are working and they want to do something, want to perform an action, they go through 3 different phases, okay? The first one is they sense things. The second one is that they think about what they have sensed. And the third thing is that they act on that, okay? So first we sense. So we think about our senses. We think about smell, we think about sight, we think about touch, we think about taste, and we think about hearing, right? So those are all of our senses. That information comes into our brains, and we think about it. We think about what does it mean and what do we want to do next. And once we decide what we're going to do, then it goes on to act, okay? So we decide to perform an action, whether it be clicking the mouse or pushing a button. And then, most importantly, we go back to sense. After we act, our environment has changed. Something has changed. So we go back to sense to try to see what's changed, and then go back to think to decide what we're going to do next. So understanding these three different steps in this cycle and how it goes is really important in observing it, and then also thinking about what we can do to then try to influence the user experience, any of those elements of the user experience that we saw before, to try to improve the productivity of the user. So let's just talk about, for example, sight. Now, there is a concept that we can talk about at this stage, that we can influence at this stage, called visual hierarchy. Okay? Now, we're talking about sight. Visual hierarchy, the purpose of visual hierarchy is to make something stand out more than something else. And this is useful if people are spending a lot of time in the sense part of this cycle trying to figure out where to click on a tool, in a game development tool. So for example, let's say that I have these 4 dots here, right? So these 4 dots here like this, and I want to draw attention to one of those dots. And there are a couple of different ways that we can do that. One is by changing the position. So if I have these dots here like this, and I put one of them over here, I'm changing the position of one of those. I'm adding some white space around it, and I'm drawing attention to that. As humans, we sort of are drawn to things that are different, and we have no choice but to sort of, our eyes are drawn to that without really thinking about it. We ask ourselves, what is it that's different about that? The other thing that we can do is that we can change the size. So by making one of those dots larger, we're changing the size of the dot, and our eyes are drawn to that. Again, we have this interest in what is it that makes that different? Why is it different? Another thing that we can do differently is contrast. So by making one of those dots darker or a different color or contrast than the others, we draw people's attention to that as well. And so they look at that and they're trying to figure out what it is about that that's different. Why should I be looking at this? And we can also do, finally, something like motion. We can make one of those dots move. And again, people wonder, what is it about that dot that I should be paying attention to? Why is that important? Now we can combine all of these things together. Let's say if we were to do this over here, I have something over here that is size, position, contrast, and motion. So if you combine all those together, your eye is inevitably drawn to this. You try to figure out what is different about that. Now, why is that important for game development tools? Well, let's take, for example, an engine installer. If we have an installer that has a whole bunch of different options all over it, right? Lots of different buttons and radio buttons, checkboxes, and that kind of thing. And a beginner just wants to install the engine. That's all they want to do. And they have difficulty figuring out where they're supposed to look. We can use visual hierarchy to do things, again, like using contrast, size, position, and motion to make the button that they should be focusing on much easier to see so that they can focus in on that button and know what to click on. As a beginner user, trying to find the most important functionality that you're looking for sometimes is something that you can spend a lot of time in that sense phase looking for something. And visual hierarchy is something that we can do to influence the user to look at a certain part of the interface. Now, we've seen this in things like, for example, Microsoft Office. You'll notice that, for example, in almost in PowerPoint and Word and in Excel, the first tab has this big paste button here and a smaller copy and cut button. And the reason for that is that in their research, Microsoft recognized when they were building the ribbon that most people use the paste command. They use the paste command more than they use cut and copy. And it's something that a lot of people want to do. They want to know where that button is. So they made this large button that's very easy to spot because people, they'll paste from outside of Word into Word. They'll paste from within Word to Word, but they're only going to copy and cut from within Word or within PowerPoint. But you paste a lot more. So they made that button really large and front and center. So it's easier for people to find it right away. So that's one thing that we can do to try to improve the user experience, influencing where the user is going to look so that they find what they're looking for. Now, we can talk about think. Once we've gotten through sense, then the user thinks about what they're going to do. And there's a couple of different ways that we can influence this. So one of the things that we're going to talk about is something called chunking. Now, Jillian, I'm going to ask for your assistance on this. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
So we're going to play a little game here basically. What I'm going to do is I'm going to write a series of letters and numbers on the screen. And I'm going to give you 5 seconds to memorize those letters and numbers, all right?
Oh gosh, okay. I'm glad I had breakfast today.
So I'm going to write a series of letters and numbers. You're going to have 5 seconds, okay?
Okay.
Are you ready? Okay, I'm going to start.
Yep.
Yep. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Now, approximately how many letters and numbers do you think were on the screen?
8.
Okay, that's pretty good. And can you try to recall any of those letters and numbers just off the top of your head?
Yes, there was definitely a 6 and a 4, an E, and I think an L.
Okay. Any others?
W? I think it's W.
Okay. So now here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write the same letters and numbers again. Okay.
Okay.
And you're going to have 5 seconds to try to memorize those ones again. Okay. I'm going to write the same letters and numbers.
Okay.
You ready? Okay.
Yes. They look a little more memorable this time,
Yes.
David.
So now let me try to. I don't even think I put them on for 5 seconds. Let me hide those again. Now, can you list back those letters and numbers for me?
I can. S, W, I. I think it helps that I work in this industry. Yeah.
So yeah, these examples were right. These examples were on purpose, right? Because we work in this industry, we recognize these things. Now, in your brain, you have a chunk for N64, a chunk for SNES, and a chunk for Wii. You don't see these things as individual letters, right? But when I write them like this, SNES, N64, WII, you have to memorize, you have to remember each individual letter. And it's very hard for you to remember each of those when they're out of context like that. You have to, basically each letter becomes a separate chunk for you. You may have heard about Miller's 7 plus or minus 2 research. That number has sort of been contested now. It's slightly smaller than people thought it was before. And the reason for that is that people chunk information together. So it's a lot easier for you to remember SNES, N64, and Wii because those are 3 chunks in your brain as opposed to all these other ones. Now, why does that matter for game development? Well, let's say, for example, that we are asking people to think about or to work with colors in RGBA. So when I think about RGBA and I have FF0000FF, I know from my experience that this is red. I chunk it as one big piece. You know, this is one chunk for me. Okay. So if you're working with regular, web codes or whatever, that's fine. Let's take something like, let's say, XAML, okay? XAML and WPF uses an ARGB model, which is different. So that would be FF0000, okay? Now, this is more difficult for people because they haven't memorized it. They don't chunk it in the same way as they've chunked this. So when you look at this, you kind of have to split it up in your brain like, okay, that's the red now, this is the green, this is the blue, and that's the alpha. People, if they think about what this color is in RGBA, it's faster. But when you change around the order of these different chunks, they spend a lot more time in the think phase. They spend more time trying to figure out what that is. So by presenting the information to the user in such a way that they are familiar with and that they have already memorized certain patterns for, in the same way that you might memorize your multiplication tables, if we present the information to the user in a way they're familiar with, they spend a lot less time thinking about it. But if we present it to them in such a way that's out of order, that's difficult for them to understand, or we present it in a different order in different parts of the tool, they spend a lot more time in the think phase. So let's talk about one other example here again where I'm going to ask for your participation. So Jillian, let's say, I'm going to try to carefully do this here. Let's say I am to draw this icon, and you saw this on a button. What would this icon mean to you?
That would mean save.
Right. So people are accustomed to that meaning save. But here's a question. When's the last time you used the diskette?
I was definitely still a teenager. Definitely a
Right.
teenager.
Exactly. So for most of us, most of us that's the case, right? I mean, I've heard stories, in fact, about people teaching software to a certain generation of kids, and they know that that means save, but they don't really know what it is. They just think it's that square thing. But like, when was the last time you used the diskette? A lot of people, it's been a long time ago. But that doesn't matter because they recognize that icon. Okay. Here, I'll draw another one for you. I'll try to do this one carefully as well. It's kind of hard to do things that are recognizable here. Okay, I'll try to do this. Oops, let me go back.
P.S.
There
David,
we go.
are you the Bob Ross of the developer world?
Hold on, let's try. Look, the happy little buttons over here.
Yeah, exactly.
Happy little buttons. All right, all
They're
right.
happy buttons.
So if if I draw this icon over here, what does that signify when you see that? What does it make you think of?
I think that's the call button.
Yeah, so like
Okay,
a call, making a phone call or whatever.
Right.
But yeah, right here. So here's a question for you. When was the last time, right, that you used a rotary phone, right? I mean, that's where these things with the big dangly, you know, the big curly cord. That's this headset, the receiver here. That's where this comes from, right? This icon. But people haven't used rotary phones for years. Yet this icon, people recognize it in different orientations, in different forms. People know what it means. Okay, I'll do one last one for you now as well. Okay, let's see here. Do this.
I'm liking these games, David.
Oh, good, good. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Okay, so a couple of things like this. Okay,
Okay.
now if you were to see this on a sign somewhere, let's say, what would that mean to you?
That is so a train.
Okay, so yeah, smokestack, right? A smoke train, smoke coming off of it, right? This is for a lot of people means a train. But the question is, like, when was the last time that you rode on like a steam engine, right? Like, not a lot of people ride on trains that have steam engines these days. A lot of trains look like this, right? They're super sleek trains. And in fact, like, if I had a sign that just sort of had this nondescript kind of, you know, squarish wedge shaped on it, nobody would really recognize what it means, even though that's a better representation of what modern trains look like, right? So the important thing is, when it comes to icons, a lot of people kind of try to reinvent the wheel. They try to come up with this, you know, like a cloud icon for save or something fancy like that. And it's possible. It's true that when you save, you might be saving to the cloud. You might be sending your stuff onto a network. And it's possible that these icons do represent that concept better. But the fact is that these icons are what people are familiar with. So familiarity trumps a perfect representation. So in an effort to try to get people to spend less time in the think phase, we want to try to make an effort to use familiar icons over reinventing these icons. Just going and finding icons that represent, that are familiar, as opposed to those that are perfect representation. So we've spent less time in sense, we've spent less time in think. And now it's come time to act. It's come time to click on something or to take some sort of action. Now, I spoke before about how we want to make things that are productive as opposed to fun. Now, games are fun, and also are certain, you know, consumer electronics. Now, you know, if we were to think about, let's say, if we were to design Mario Brothers in the same way that we wanted to make some of our tools, you know, a level of Mario would look like this, right? You'd spawn, and the flag would be right in front of you, and you'd be done. But the fact is that Mario Brothers has obstacles for us to jump over, you know, to get to our goal, and we feel good about that. That's what makes the game fun. It's the challenge, right? It's not our job to go and collect this flag. It's entertainment. So that sort of action of going and jumping over these things is fun, but if our job was to go and collect flags, this would be really frustrating. We would wish that we would have something like this. Now, what we want with our tools, right, if we want to get to our goal, right, we want our cursor to be really near the content that we're working on, the stuff that we need to click on. But the fact is that a lot of our tools, right, if you think about it, it's actually a little bit more like this. Like, we have all of these obstacles that we have to get over to get to our goal. And those are things like unnecessarily long drop-down menus and all sorts of tabs within tabs within tabs and windows within windows. There's all of this extra work that we have to do with our mouse to get to what we want to work on. and that's called excise. Excise is this unnecessary movement that we're doing with our mouse to try to get to our content. And what we want to try to do is, I mean, I've seen this before where, a developer might have two screens, and, they have a property window over here, and they have an asset over there, and their mouse is going from the asset all the way over to the property window and then all the way back over to the asset and back and forth. And again, only by observing the person at their desk can we see this. We realize that there's all this unnecessary mouse movement that really, really adds up over time. What we want to try to do is we want to try to get, that content near the tools or vice versa. So if we have something that reduces that travel time between the content and the controls, all of that adds up to more time. So that reduces the time in the act. So those are just a couple of examples: visual hierarchy, chunking, iconography, excise, reducing excise. That by doing those things, we can influence the time that it takes the user to do these things and hopefully reduce the time they spend in sense and think and act and allow them to be more productive and to produce more and better assets.
Okay, and that makes total sense. So for people looking at this and they're like, okay, yes, we want to make people more productive at each of these steps in this cycle, but how do they, okay, I want to do this. How do I do it? How do I approach this?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. So you see here that I put the user at the center, and that's really what it's all about. We really have to put the user at the center of everything, and understand that to know how to make their environment. Again, if user experience is about the experience of the user and that we can observe and influence it, how do we observe that? So there is a process. There's an ISO standard for it called the Human-Centered Design Process. And what it is basically we have the user at the center here, and there are lots of different forms of this. So I'm just going to go over a very simplified version of this because this can get very complex. But basically, what we do is we go through this cycle, okay? And every step of the cycle involves the user. There's a great quote that it's a shift from making tools, or it's a shift of working, making things for users to working with users. It's just a subtle difference between those two things. Involving the users at every step and understanding how they use the tools is extremely important. So the first thing that we might do is to analyze, and then second step to design solutions, okay? And then finally to evaluate those solutions. And this also is a cycle. So we analyze the situation. What is the user doing? What are they thinking? What are they working on? And then we design solutions to try to improve their situation, okay? And then we want to evaluate. We want to put those in front of them and get their feedback on it. So then we can go back to analyze again and to try to figure out what to do next. Okay, we're trying to. I mean, it's, in some ways, what's interesting is that this is very similar to Agile. We are working directly with people. We are valuing working software. We're valuing something that we can test over documentation, and we are constantly assessing our situation and adapting to it. Okay, so if we believe in Agile, those who believe in Agile, this process should be very natural for them as well. So one of the misconceptions about this process is that it's a big laborious process, that there's lots and lots of steps at all three phases, and that you have to go through everything. And that it takes a lot of time. And that's not true. And the other thing that's not true is that you have to jump in at a certain phase and that there's a perfect time to do it. You can jump in at any time in the analysis phase and understand what people are doing, observe them, watch them work, and then create a design and then evaluate that. You can jump straight in by creating a design based upon some observations that you've had, evaluate it with users, and then analyze to figure out if it's the right solution. You can jump straight into evaluating, doing a user test and seeing how people perform, and then analyzing that, the results of that, and then designing solutions to make things better. There is no right or wrong time, and you can jump in at any phase. So I just want to talk about briefly each of these different steps and some of the things that we might do at each of these phases. And probably the most important aspect of the analysis phase is to identify the user's goals. And this helps us to prioritize and figure out exactly what's going to give us the best return on our investment. So I talk about this at my GDC Europe 2013 talk which again should be linked in the show notes in the PowerPoint. So you can also do a Google search, my name with the GDC 2013. You can go and watch that video. And I've done this many times with a lot of different people. And basically, it's an exercise where what I do is I compare a Swiss Army knife to a pair of scissors, basically. And the purpose of the exercise basically so basically what I do is I get two people up on stage and I give one of them a pair of scissors and one of them a Swiss Army knife. And what I say is, here's your goal. Your task is to cut this piece of paper in half, okay, without folding it. So first of all, I give the piece of paper to the person with the scissors and they cut it in half, no problem, right down the middle, beautiful, perfect. So they do a good job really quickly. Now the person with the Swiss Army knife, first they have to figure out what is inside the Swiss Army knife. You know, they might open it up and then maybe there's a blade, maybe there's a corkscrew, maybe there's a smaller knife, and there's some other kinds of tools like a toothpick or something. Like these are all things, they're looking for a pair of scissors. Some Swiss Army knives have sort of a mini pair of scissors inside that you operate with your thumb, but they don't find them. So they spend a lot of time trying to understand what it does. And then, you know, they resign themselves to the fact that they have to use the knife. And, you know, they end up basically ripping that piece of paper in half because the knife is not a very good tool for this sort of job. Now, a lot of our tools, what we try to do is we try to provide kind of like a Swiss Army knife. We try to provide things that do a lot of things not so well, as opposed to really understanding what the user's goals are and providing a smaller set of tools that do one or two or three things really, really well. So if we think about this, you know, in regards to how much time and energy we put into a tool, let's say, you know, if we have tools A, B, and C, and, you know, this, we can either make the users very productive or not very productive. We tend to have lots of tools that we spread our energy across multiple tools because we're trying to do all sorts of things at once, as opposed to, you know, if we, again, have the users happy and sad here, understanding the user's goals and putting all of our energy into that one tool that's going to have the biggest impact on productivity. And so by going to somebody's desk, by watching people work at their desk as opposed to being in a meeting room and hearing their opinion, understanding how people work, you have to go and watch them in their environment to really understand what they're doing. Because people do things at their desks in front of their tools that they don't think about when they're in a meeting room. You have to go out and sit at their desks and watch them work to really understand what their goals are and to understand what's going to have the biggest impact so that we can put our time and energy into the right tool to be able to maximize their productivity. So that's about analysis. Now, once we've analyzed what the user does and what their goals are, and we've prioritized exactly what we want to do, then we move on to the next phase, which is design. So now another thing that happens when we hear the word design, we think about, you know, again, interface, about colors, about doing all sorts of fancy UIs, dark UIs, and that is one thing that contributes to the user experience. It's true. However, what's a really, really important thing to understand about the design phase is guidelines. Something that's called guidelines or something that's called patterns. Now, guidelines and patterns, there are guidelines that are made by Microsoft about how to construct the user interface, but basically guidelines that you can use that determine how the user interface is built. And if you look at those guidelines, because you can look them up on the internet, if you type in Windows Desktop Guidelines Microsoft, you'll find a series of guidelines about how everything in Windows and in Office is made. They are recommendations about where to place buttons. And people talk, why is this important? Because people talk a lot about how they want to make an interface that's intuitive. They want to make an intuitive UI. And there really is no such thing as an intuitive UI. There are two kinds of user interfaces. There are those that we have learned, and there are those that we have not yet learned. Now, Microsoft did a really, really nice example of this in one of their presentations called It's a Trap. And so they give these great examples where they imagine you're working on a touchscreen interface. And imagine you're on a touchscreen interface and you want to change the screen to look like this to look like this. So naturally, everybody thinks they're just going to, swipe their finger from the top left to the bottom right, and that makes sense. That's easy, okay? Because this mimics how things work in real life when we move an object with our finger. And they show another example then. If you want to change it from this to this, then people get confused. Because these are magic things that computers do, right? We can't duplicate objects in real life. There is no natural, intuitive way of doing this. You have to learn how to do this on a computer, and especially with the touch screen, it's not natural. Likewise, if we have this object here and then we change the color to something else, again, we can't do that in real life. These are things that computers do, and we have to learn how to do those things. But once we learn how to do them, we learn that pattern, and the next time we see something like this, we know what to do. So if I show you, for example, something like this, a series of radio buttons, we know that this is an exclusive choice. We can only choose one of that list. Relative to when we see a series of checkboxes, we know that we can have one or more or none selected. And we only know that because we've used Windows, and we use Windows for the majority of people working in game development. We use Windows every day, or even in Mac OS, it's the same thing. We've learned this. And the danger that happens is that when we, as tools developers, try to go against the guidelines, we try to do something different and fresh that we think is neat in terms of design, and that hurts the user in terms of their understanding of the tool. So by following the existing guidelines, we can make it easier for people to understand our tools and make them more efficient. So one of the things you want to be doing in this design phase to try to identify, you understand the user's goals, and now you want to identify what are the best existing patterns that I can find that I can then apply to solve this problem. Whether they come from the Windows UX guidelines, that might also come from observations that you've seen in other tools that the developers or that the game developers use often, like something from Autodesk or something from Adobe. If you look at those tools all together and you find a consistent pattern in the way something is done and you follow that, people will say that your tool feels intuitive. But it's not really intuitive. What it really means is that it feels familiar. They have learned this before, and it feels natural. So analysis and design, and now we're on to the last phase, which is evaluation. And I talk a bit about evaluation in my GDC 2015 talk as well, which I believe you'll find on the Vault. So in evaluation, it's important for us to try to visualize what it is that we want to do, what our goals are, what it is that we want to accomplish. We have a goal, we have some guidelines in mind. Now we want to evaluate that. If we have developers available, it's best to just go ahead and make the changes to that tool to be able to really evaluate, especially if we want to evaluate in terms of productivity. It's hard to evaluate productivity based upon a sketch. But if we want to try to visualize some of these ideas quickly and inexpensively, we can use visuals so that everybody on the team agrees on what it is that we want to do. So Jillian, I'm going to do another final activity with you here if you're ready. Are you?
I'm ready.
Great. So now when people are working on a user interface or a team is discussing changes they want to make to a tool, they might sort of verbally agree, maybe between the developers and the users, about what they want to do. But the reality is that just by talking about something without visualizing it, you guys could be talking about two different things. Okay? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write a word on the screen. Okay? And I want you to think about in your head, visualize what that word, an object that word means to you. Okay? So the first thing I'm going to do is the word letter. Okay? The word letter. Now, when I say the word letter, what's an object that pops into your head?
A piece of paper.
A piece of paper, right. So it could be a piece of paper, but maybe I was thinking about the letter A, right?
Yeah.
Could both be the same thing, right? Or you could also be thinking about something that's a letter that's in an envelope that's sealed, right? Okay, let's do another one. If I say the word picture, picture.
Yep.
Okay, now, in your head, visualize an object for a picture. What are you seeing in your head?
Well, the first thing that came to mind was a framed picture I have on my nightstand.
And see, I love that. I love that. It's so interesting, right? Because picture, so even just, you can see how just by verbalizing something, I've written it, P-I-T-C-H-E-R, but just, without writing it down. So that's another kind of like a further example of how visualizing is important. So just by hearing something, we're thinking about two different things. But if I say P-I-T-C-H-E-R, when I've done this exercise with people,
right, yeah.
right? Some people think of, it's 5 o'clock,
Last picture,
a pitcher of beer. Or they might be thinking about, right, if you're maybe for certain people from Puerto Rico or people who are fans of baseball, they're going to think about a pitcher, right, somebody throwing a ball. So by saying this word, again, without visualizing it, we're talking about two different things. Okay, let's do one last one. If I say the word bow, if I say bow, what's the word that comes into your head?
Well, I'm thinking of a Christmas bow, a red Christmas bow.
Yeah, kind of something like that, or maybe with something like this, for sure. Right,
That's
so it could be that, yeah. Or, it might be something for like maybe, archery or RPG fans out there. People might be thinking of a bow and arrow like this. Or, if you're a classical music nerd, maybe like I am, maybe you're thinking about a bow, like to play a stringed instrument. But by visualizing these things, by actually making them visible, by sharing the visuals of these things, we really are on the same page about what we're talking about. But when you just use words, it gets dangerous because you could be talking about two totally different things. So the developers and tools developers and users get into a room together and they agree about what they're going to do. But if they don't take just a bit of time to visualize what they want to do, then the developers can go back to their desks, make changes to something, come back and show it to the users, and the users say, oh, no, that's not what I had in mind at all. When we were in the meeting, I was thinking about this picture, but the developers made that picture. You know what I mean? So really taking the time to visualize what you want to do and then evaluate that with the users, to have them look at it and understand exactly what it is that you're planning on doing before you go forward and implement those changes can really save you a lot of time. So this cycle, what you want to do is go through that cycle as many times as you have time for, as many times as you have budget for, again, to try to influence the user experience and to try to observe the user experience and influence the user experience to try to improve productivity.
In terms of time, how long and complicated is this process, or should it be? Like, I know, do it as many times as you need, whatnot, but like, if you had to summarize it and say, this is how complicated it is and how long it would take to someone, what would you recommend?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of people look at this, and like I said, there's misconceptions about, there has to be the perfect time and I have to do all of these steps. You don't. In the same way that that Agile, you take what you need and you just use the tools that you need for that particular job. In the same way, you should, by depending upon your situation, just take what it is that is appropriate for what you're doing and go through this cycle. Like I said, over and over again, to observe, make changes, evaluate how the changes are helping the user, and go back. And the other thing that's a bit intimidating, I think, is that people look at this and they say, I have to do this for my, all of my tools, my entire tool. But you really, especially with the analysis phase, this helps enormously. Start off by observing people and try to identify, just a thin slice of your tool, just a little piece that's going to represent a really big gain in terms of the time that people take to create assets. Just take a small piece. You don't have to redesign everything. Sometimes your user interface is going to look very similar, and you're just changing the folder structure of the assets, or maybe you're upgrading some hard drives because you notice that through observation the user experience is predominantly affected by the build times, and that's the hard drive problem, let's say. Or people are having trouble finding a certain control in the user interface and they're spending a lot of time looking for it. Then you can use something like visual hierarchy to go and help them find that control. It doesn't have to be a complete overhaul, but you have to go out and watch people work at their desks, recognize and identify what it is that they're having problems with, and make little incremental changes, and then evaluate those and see if they're working. And again, it can be, and it maybe even should, to start, just be on a little small piece to try to have the maximum return on investment, bang for your buck. Start with the low-hanging fruit, figure out what it is that's causing the most people the most amount of pain, and start with that, and then just keep going through that loop as many times as you can. You don't have to do everything. Just start small, identify something that you want to improve, and build on that. And the last thing that I want to talk about is it's really important to analyze and evaluate, like I said, and sort of the way that I think about it is if we're starting over here and we want to get to this goal over here. I think without taking the time to analyze and evaluate, we're sort of meandering around trying to figure out where we should go, and we eventually make our way to our goal, right? And people look at this and go, you know, this process is going to take a lot of time. It's going to take a lot of time to go through all these steps. But if we're not taking the time to understand what people need, we're just wandering around in the hopes that we're reaching our goal. As opposed to that, going forward, taking time to evaluate where we are, and then again, going forward, taking time to evaluate where we are, what's best for the users, what's helping them be most productive, and then continuing on to get to our goal, basically, the time that we spend stopping and looking around and figuring out what we should do next, overall, should be a lot less than sort of meandering around and hoping that we're coming up with the right solution. And that's the importance of understanding, analyzing, designing based upon patterns, evaluating, going through this cycle, and going to people's desks to really understand their world and how they work. That's how we're really going to improve the user experience of our tools.
That's really great. One thing that you said that really struck with me was the most people, the most amount of pain. You know, and what you're saying, it does sound complicated, but if you really think about the basics of what you're saying, it makes so much sense.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of I mean, it is really not rocket science. You know, when you describe this process of just user testing, you know, when you say, well, think about a couple of tasks, go out and watch people work at their desks, and then, you know, watch a bunch of people, like watch a bunch of people working at their desks, and then look at how they did, you know, all this sort of list of tasks that you wrote down and see where the majority of people are having problems. It's true. You look at it on face value and you say it's not that complicated, and it really isn't. It's very different from how we are accustomed to working. But I believe that this has worked well in other industries, and I think it's about time that the games industry starts to benefit from these techniques.
I think that's great. I'm just going to take your screen back from you, the presenter, so I can share your information again, if that's okay with you, for sure. Okay. Let me see if I can do this very quickly. Okay, so here we go. Here's your information up on the screen again, because I think it's really important for a lot of people to read and watch. And yeah, we don't have any more questions for you today, but I was wondering if you had some parting words of wisdom for us.
Yeah, I've been really fortunate to be doing this work at Ubisoft, and there's a lot of really great people that I work with, and so we're trying to do something that's very different, it's very new in the games industry, but I feel like you know, more and more people are catching on, and yeah, there's a great bunch of people that I work with, and we're doing some really good work together. So yeah, I feel so fortunate to be able to do this, and I hope that my book and my presentations and the webinar today will help other people to see how this can help improve the productivity of their teams. And if they have any questions, just to please don't hesitate to contact me.
Oh, well, that's great. You know, and I'm sure people will really enjoy your words for sure. And just pretty quickly, here's some more resources and information, and I want to thank everyone for checking out the webinar. Hopefully you'll reach out to David if you have any questions, and in terms of the next webinar, stay tuned. We'll be announcing it soon, as well as a topic, and that's it for us today. So again, David, thank you very much for sharing all your insight with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.